Welcome back. You're watching France 24. Coming up, the Paris prosecutor opens a terror investigation in the wake of Thursday's rampage by a civilian employee at police headquarters. After the news, it'll be the world this week. We'll be talking about French police under pressure. First, there was that demonstration sparked by a spate of suicides. Then that rampage at police headquarters in Paris that's left 4 dead. Your reaction to that story and much more on Facebook and Twitter. #WorldThisWeek. Here in Paris, word coming in the past hour that magistrates have moved what had been a criminal investigation over to anti-terror prosecutors. This after Thursday's rampage at police headquarters across from Notre Dame in the heart of the French capital. There, a 45-year-old IT assistant who'd been working for 18 years there went on a knife rampage, killing his superior as well as 3 officers before he was shot dead. French media have said the attacker had converted to Islam 18 months ago. It's not been publicly confirmed, though, by authorities. A statement's been put out that in light of the elements gathered by criminal investigators at this stage of the inquiry, the National Anti-Terror Prosecutor Unit has taken up the investigation into those events. Earlier, we spoke to counter-terror analyst and consultant Yann Saint-Pierre.
It's not necessarily one of surprise because as the events unfolded last night and early this morning, more and more elements were coming out that this could point indeed towards a terrorism attack. However, it's been proven in the past that we need to be cautious when such elements come out, and we need to let the investigators do their job. But I wasn't necessarily surprised when that came out.
Yeah, there are several French media reporting that the wife told police her husband, who was deaf, had made visions and made incoherent statements during the night before the attack. Of course, this is hearsay at this point.
Absolutely, and right now that's the biggest issue especially when we're outside of the investigative bubble, is to try to make sense of anything, any element that comes out, and try to turn it into a logical timeline or to a possible sign that something was about to go wrong. And that's a huge problem because we often tend to see signs or a level of relevance that isn't necessarily there for something that could have been very trivial.
Colleagues said that he had words in the past or had problems in the past with his superior at the office. There could, of course, be more than one motive for the attack.
Absolutely. That's not unheard of with terrorist attacks. If that is indeed the case, is that the motivations are actually multiple. One can act as a trigger. Then it fits into a larger rhetoric or a larger logic that leads to the planning of the attack. So it's not necessarily one motive. It's usually a combination of various factors that lead to the attack with a framing that's usually political.
And just to recap again, the fact that the anti-terror unit has taken on the investigation, what does it mean?
Well, it means a lot. That's usually that the elements are there strongly pointing towards terrorism. I think in this case, it's not just the fact that the anti-terrorism unit has taken over, but rather that it's taken over later on in the stages of the investigation. Last night, it was ready to stand to help out, but it wasn't necessarily taking over the investigation. Now that it's doing so, roughly 24 hours later, says a lot. That means there are enough elements present within the investigation to suggest that it could indeed be terrorism.
That it could indeed be terrorism. And we have, of course, seen this before in France. with people who up to then had never been flagged as radicalized.
Yes, it's become extremely difficult because we're often looking for signs that aren't necessarily updated. That means we're looking for a pattern of behavior that isn't necessarily suitable to what events over the last few years have demonstrated in terms of behavioral patterns. We're also looking for organizations as a whole that could radicalize someone, whereas in the digital age, anyone having access to the internet can find people that are like-minded, that share common visions, and that can be anywhere around the world. So we're very often the early warning signs that we're looking for aren't necessarily adapted to the context in which we live in.
And at this point in time, again, once again, it's been handed over to the anti-terror magistrates, and in light of fresh evidence which has not been brought forth to the public. The age of the suspect, 45. What does that tell you?
Well, it confirms again that the classic profile, the one that we've developed over, I would say, the last 6-7 years of roughly 18 to 25, which it's a big part of terrorists worldwide are within that age bracket. But we've seen in England, people as an attacker in his 50s, in his 60s. So to find out that terrorists or attackers could be considered to be middle-aged men or middle-aged adults is no longer a surprise. And it shows, again, that the profile needs to be adapted, that we're no longer necessarily talking about vulnerable youth, but people as a whole that find whatever ideology appealing and are willing to act on it.
And we'll have more on that in the world this week. Donald Trump's making the suspense last. Hours before the deadline set by Democrats for his administration to hand over documents requested for Congress's impeachment investigation, the U.S. president telling reporters he's not sure he'll comply. This follows revelations leaked from Thursday's testimony. Sam Bradpiece has more.
Thank you. I'll see you in Florida.
Donald Trump has denied that he had any quid pro quo exchange with Ukraine. But text messages released by the House Intelligence Committee on Thursday suggest a different story. A message sent from former Special Envoy for Ukraine, Kurt Volker, to a key advisor to the Ukrainian President Zelensky appears to offer him a state visit to Washington in exchange for the opening of an investigation into the Biden family.
Heard from the White House. Assuming President Zelensky convinces Trump he will investigate/get to the bottom of what happened in 2016, we will nail down date for visit to Washington.
Another message sent from top US diplomat Bill Taylor to the US ambassador to the European Union suggests that the US would withhold military aid to Ukraine if the country failed to open the investigation. Taylor seems to suggest that this might be motivated by Trump's personal ambitions ahead of the 2020 presidential elections.
I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign.
It is illegal for a US national to seek foreign help in a domestic election. But back in August, a whistleblower revealed that Trump had pushed Ukraine's leader to dig up dirt on Biden, one of his main political opponents. Now the US president is facing an impeachment inquiry. He has called publicly on Ukraine to investigate the Biden family for alleged dodgy business dealings there.
I don't care about Biden's campaign, but I do care about corruption. His campaign, that's up to him. Politics, that's up to them. I don't care about politics.
But at this stage, Ukraine's chief prosecutor says he has no incriminating information on Biden.
I cannot say that we see or understand all the cases. This work is continuing and we'll report on its results later.
As revelations continue to emerge, Trump is under increasing pressure. Congressional plans to subpoena the White House for documents related to Ukraine will only worsen his headache as the impeachment inquiry continues.
In Iraq, the death toll has climbed to 56. Live ammunition again used to try and quash protests against corruption in what's become a direct challenge to Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi's government 1 year after he came to power. Emerald Maxwell has more.
The sound of gunfire rings out in the virtually deserted streets of Baghdad as Iraqi security forces target the few protesters who have defied around-the-clock curfew. South of the Iraqi capital in Najaf, families have begun burying their relatives. Anti-government protesters who were met by police using water cannon, tear gas and live rounds.
He was martyred in a protest. He was calling for the rights of the people. He was 23 years old.
The nationwide demonstrations started spontaneously on Tuesday, mostly spurred by anger over endemic corruption in the oil-rich country and a lack of jobs and public services. The country's top cleric has called for calm, while also blaming authorities, and in particular lawmakers, for ignoring calls for reform.
Parliament bears the biggest responsibility in all this. If it doesn't change its ways and respond to the realistic demands for reform, then there will be no real change on the ground.
The UN also expressed concern at the crackdown on protesters.
We are worried by reports that security forces have used live ammunition and rubber bullets in some areas. We call on the Iraqi government to allow people to freely exercise their rights to freedom of expression and peacefully assembly.
The unrest is the most serious challenge yet for Abdul Mahdi's not-yet-year-old government. The Prime Minister has appealed for patience from protesters, saying he needed more time to implement reforms.
And we have more news coming up for you later. It's time now for The World This Week.